Only one room left. CEO and gorgeous woman share an unforgettable hotel stay. This story is for my beautiful, loyal and loving family, the ones who have always stood by me. Everything begins with love, and that's where our story starts too. Before we begin, I just ask one small thing from you. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and write "present" in the comments, so I know my family is here with me. Your love gives meaning to every word I speak. Thank you for being my greatest blessing. Some nights rewrite your entire existence. Some strangers become your forever. And some hotel rooms hold secrets that 9 months cannot contain. The mountain trembled beneath sheets of rain so thick the world disappeared. Susan Jolie pressed her hands against the Grand Lodge window, watching nature's fury swallow the last remnants of daylight. Her silk blouse clung to her shoulders from the sprint inside, her natural curls heavy with moisture, dark skin glistening under the lobby's amber lights. "I'm sorry, miss. Every room is occupied," the clerk's apologetic tone barely registered through the thunder's roar. Susan's throat tightened. The art conference had ended hours ago, but she'd stayed behind to photograph the mountain landscape for her gallery's new collection. Now the storm had her trapped with nowhere to rest. "Check again. Please, anything. A storage closet with a cot." Behind her, a voice emerged, deep, weighted with exhaustion that money couldn't cure. "Give her my room." Susan turned. The man stood near the fireplace, tall and commanding, even in his weariness. White King. She didn't know his name yet, only that his presence filled the space like he owned gravity itself. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms that suggested strength beyond boardroom battles. But his eyes held something that made her breath catch, a loneliness that matched her own. "I can't take your room," Susan said, her voice steadier than her heartbeat. "I'm not giving it away." He moved closer, and she caught the scent of cedar and rain. "We'll share it. The storm won't break until morning. You need rest." "So do I. 2 adults can survive one night with dignity intact." The clerk's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. Susan should have refused. Should have called a friend, waited in the lobby, done anything except accept this stranger's impossible offer. But something in his exhausted honesty, the way he looked at her without assumption or demand, made her nod. "Dignity intact," she repeated. The walk to the room stretched through hallways, lined with landscape paintings that couldn't capture what Susan saw in mountains. The way light bled through storm clouds. How shadows held their own stories. White walked beside her, not ahead, not behind. Equal. He unlocked the door to reveal a suite that stole her protest. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the tempest. A fireplace crackled with fresh wood. And yes, 2 separate sitting areas with couches long enough for sleep. "I'll take the one by the window," White said, already removing his jacket. "You take the bedroom. Lock the door if it makes you comfortable." "I don't need to lock it." Susan surprised herself with the truth. He paused, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. "No, I don't think you do." They stood in strange silence, 2 people who'd never met yet recognized something fundamental in each other. Susan broke first, moving toward the window where rain created rivers down the glass. "I came here to capture loneliness," she said quietly. "To paint it, photograph it, make it beautiful enough that people would pay to hang it on their walls. Did you succeed?" "I captured emptiness, but loneliness," she shook her head. "That requires witnesses. You can't be lonely without knowing what it feels like to be found." White moved beside her, his reflection joining hers in the dark glass. "I know that feeling. Surrounded by hundreds, seen by thousands, found by no one. Why? Because they see what I built, not who I am underneath." His voice carried decades of performance. "And maybe I forgot the difference." Susan turned to face him fully. "Who are you underneath?" The question hung between them like a dare. White reached past her to open the window slightly. Cold air rushed in, carrying the storm's violence. "Someone who wanted to disappear tonight. Drive until the road ended. Stand in the rain until I remembered what it felt like to be real. And instead you found a stranded woman who needed shelter. Instead, I found someone who looks at mountains the way I wish I could look at life." He smiled, and it transformed his face from handsome to devastating. Like they're worth capturing. The moment shifted. Susan felt it in her chest, that dangerous recognition when a stranger becomes possibility. "I have wine in my bag," she offered. "Emergency supplies for cancelled flights and ruined plans. I have glasses the lodge provided, and a story about why I'm hiding in mountains instead of—" He stopped. "Instead of where you belong," Susan finished. "I don't know where I belong anymore." They settled on opposite couches, wine poured into crystal, fire casting shadows that danced like secrets. Susan learned he built empires but couldn't build peace. White learned she painted emotion but couldn't escape her own. She told him about the gallery that carried her mother's name, how art felt like prayer when words failed. He confessed that success tasted like ash when you achieved it alone. Hours dissolved. The wine warmed them from inside, while the storm raged without. Somewhere between the second glass and the third confession, Susan moved to sit beside him, not touching but close enough to share heat. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. "Does it matter tonight?" "Don't know." And it didn't. Names carried history, expectation, the weight of who you were supposed to be. Tonight, they were just two people seeking shelter from different storms. White's hand found hers. His thumb traced her knuckles with reverence that made her shiver. "I want to know you. You do know me. The parts that matter. I want to know more." Susan turned her hand to lace their fingers together. "Then know this. Tomorrow I return to my life. You return to yours. But tonight we're no one but ourselves." His other hand cupped her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. Susan leaned into the touch, starving for gentleness she'd forgotten existed. When their lips met, it wasn't rushed or desperate. It was inevitable, like the storm had orchestrated their collision, and they were simply obeying nature's command. They moved to the bedroom without discussion, discarding more than clothes, shedding expectations, fears, the armor they wore against the world. White touched her like she was art worth studying. Susan held him like he was shelter worth keeping. Against the rain-soaked windows, they found each other. His hands mapped her body with worship. Her mouth learned the taste of his surrender. They moved together with the rhythm of people who'd been lonely so long that connection felt like resurrection. "Stay with me," he breathed against her neck. "After tonight, stay. We don't even know each other's last names. I know your heart beats faster when you talk about your mother's gallery. I know you see beauty in emptiness. I know you taste like wine and courage." He kissed her deeply. "That's more than I've known about anyone in years." Susan wanted to promise forever, wanted to believe this stranger could be her salvation. But she'd learned that passion burned bright and fast, leaving only ash. "Let's have tonight," she said instead. "Let it be perfect. Don't ruin it with tomorrow." So they loved through the storm's fury, once with tenderness, again with hunger, a third time with the desperate knowing that dawn would end this. They fell asleep, tangled together, his heartbeat against her spine, her fingers laced with his. Susan woke to silence. The storm had passed. Pale light filtered through curtains, and the space beside her was empty. She found his note on the pillow. "You were right. Tonight was perfect. I won't ruin it by trying to force tomorrow. Thank you for reminding me I'm real. No name, no number. Just the ghost of cedar scent on the sheets." Susan dressed in yesterday's clothes and walked through the lobby. The clerk smiled knowingly. She didn't care. Let him think what he wanted. She carried something more precious than judgment, a memory of being seen. The drive home felt longer than it should. She stopped twice to cry without understanding why. He was a stranger. One night, meaningless in the scope of her life. But when she returned to her gallery and stood before her mother's portrait, Susan pressed her hand to her stomach, where an impossible flutter whispered, "Some nights rewrite your entire existence." She just didn't know how completely. Not yet. Not until the test showed 3 lines instead of 1, and the doctor's voice said words that shattered her world. Congratulations. You're having triplets. Chapter 2. 3 heartbeats. The ultrasound screen glowed with impossible truth. 3 tiny forms pulsed with life. 3 separate heartbeats echoing through the examination room, like drums announcing revolution. Susan stared until her eyes burned. Her hand gripped the paper covering the examination table, crinkling it into mountains that rivaled the ones where her life had split into before and after. Triplets are rare. The doctor continued, her voice professionally gentle. But your hormone levels suggested multiples. Are you feeling all right? Do you have support at home? Support. The word tasted bitter. Susan had herself, her best friend Amara, the gallery that demanded her attention. But the father? He was smoke and memory, a nameless stranger who'd given her 1 perfect night and 3 permanent consequences. I'm fine, Susan lied, sitting up as the technician handed her tissues to wipe the gel from her stomach. That stomach, still flat, still hers, but harboring 3 futures she hadn't planned. Outside the clinic, autumn air bit through her jacket. Susan walked without direction, mind spinning like leaves in wind. She should feel terrified, should feel angry at her carelessness, at the whine and want that had made her forget caution. Instead, she felt something closer to wonder. 3 babies. 3 pieces of that night made permanent. 3 reasons to stop floating through life pretending art could fill the hollow spaces. Her phone buzzed. Amara. Well, what did the doctor say? Please tell me it's just stress making you sick every morning. Susan found a bench in the park across from the clinic. Couples walked past pushing strollers. An older woman fed pigeons from a paper bag. Normal life happening while hers transformed into chaos. I'm pregnant, Susan said, with triplets. Silence stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. Susan, tell me you know how to find him. I know his first name is White. I know he's powerful. I know, her voice cracked. I know the way he touched me felt like coming home. But that's not enough to build a future on. It's enough to track him down. Powerful men leave footprints. We'll hire someone. No. Susan watched a father lift his daughter onto his shoulders, her laughter bright as birdsong. If he wanted to find me, he could have left more than a note. I won't chase a man who chose to disappear. This isn't about pride, Susan. This is about 3 children who deserve to know their father. They'll know their mother. They'll know they're wanted. That's more than some children get. Susan touched her stomach, still marveling at the impossible. I can do this. Can you? Gallery rent is murder. Supplies aren't cheap. And babies, Amara's voice softened. Babies are expensive miracles. Then I'll paint more, sell more. I'll make it work because giving up isn't an option. Determination crystallized in Susan's chest, sharp and bright. My mother raised me alone after Daddy left. She turned struggle into strength. I can do the same. But in the lonely hours before dawn, when nausea drove her from bed to bathroom tile, Susan let herself remember. White's hands cradling her face, his voice rough with want. Stay with me. The way he'd looked at her paintings on her phone like they mattered more than profit margins. She'd tried finding him, called the lodge, but they protected guest privacy. Searched online for White and CEO until her eyes crossed from futility. The world held thousands of powerful men. Without a last name, without a photo, he remained ghost. Maybe it's better this way, she told her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Maybe he's married. Maybe that night was his escape from someone else. Maybe she needed to stop torturing herself with maybes. Months crawled forward. Susan's body changed with alarming speed. Her breasts grew tender and full. Her waist disappeared beneath expanding roundness. By the time leaves turned gold and fell, she looked like she carried a basketball beneath her shirts. Amara appeared at her apartment with bags of maternity clothes and the fierce loyalty that defined their friendship. You're not doing this alone. I'm your birth partner, your midnight craving supplier, your shoulder when hormones make you cry at commercials. I cried at a dog food commercial yesterday, Susan admitted. The puppy looked so happy with his family. See, you need me. Amara unpacked stretchy pants and flowing tops. Have you thought about names? Names. Susan had thought about little else. She wanted names that meant something. Names that carried strength and beauty that her daughters could wear with pride. Lila, Mila, and Ella, she said softly. Lila for the lilac flowers my mother grew. Mila for miracle, because 3 of them at once feels miraculous. And Ella for Eleanor Roosevelt, Amara finished. Your hero. Women who change the world without permission. Susan folded a tiny onesie, marveling at its size. That's what I want for them. The courage to take up space. The gallery became both sanctuary and battleground. Susan painted through exhaustion, through backaches and swollen ankles, through the fear that whispered she wasn't enough. She created a series called Multiplication, abstract pieces where one form split into 3, chaos becoming beauty. They sold faster than anything she'd created before. People respond to truth, her assistant Ivy said while wrapping a painting for shipping. And you're painting the truth of transformation, of one becoming many. Susan's hand rested on her stomach, where 3 distinct personalities already made themselves known. One kicked constantly, a tiny fighter. Another seemed to sleep through everything, peaceful and still. The third moved in rhythmic patterns, already dancing to music only she could hear. I wish their father could feel this, Susan admitted one afternoon, while Amara helped her assemble cribs in the nursery. These moments, they're magic. And he's missing all of it. His loss. Amara tightened a screw with unnecessary force. Any man who walks away from you is a fool. But Susan remembered his face in firelight, the raw honesty when he'd confessed his loneliness. White hadn't walked away from love. He'd walked away from a night he thought was beautiful enough to preserve by not ruining it with reality. How could she hate him for that when she'd agreed? Still, in her weakest moments, Susan let herself imagine finding him somehow, showing him the ultrasound photos, watching his face transform when he realized that perfect night had created perfect consequences. Would he be angry, afraid? Would he deny them? Or would he look at her the way he had against rain-soaked windows, like she held answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask? The fantasies always ended the same, with Susan alone, staring at empty space beside her bed, accepting that some mysteries remained unsolved. Winter arrived with sharp teeth and frozen ground. Susan's doctor scheduled the delivery, concerned about complications with triplets. The night before, Susan sat in the nursery, surrounded by 3 cribs, 3 changing tables, 3 of everything. Tomorrow you meet the world, she whispered to the 3 lives inside her. And I promise you this, you'll never wonder if you're wanted. You'll never question if you're enough. Your mama will make sure you know every single day that you are my greatest adventure. They responded with kicks and rolls. A conversation without words. Susan pressed her hands to her stomach and let herself remember one last time. Cedar scent and strong arms. Tenderness that felt like worship. A stranger's promise. Tonight we're no one but ourselves. I'm sorry, she said to the ghost of him. I'm sorry you'll miss them growing. I'm sorry I couldn't find you. But mostly, tears tracked down her cheeks. Mostly I'm sorry that perfect night had to end at all. The next morning, Susan brought 3 daughters into the world through pain that rewrote her understanding of strength. Lila arrived first, crying with impressive volume. Mila followed silently, her dark eyes wide and knowing. Ella came last, small but fierce, her grip strong on Susan's finger. 3 girls, the nurse said, placing them on Susan's chest. You're going to have your hands full. Susan looked at their perfect faces, miniature copies of her own features, mixed with something else. Something that made her heart ache. Their father's eyes stared back at her from 3 small faces. Storm cloud gray, impossible to deny. Worth it, Susan breathed, kissing each tiny forehead. Every single moment worth it. But as nurses took photos and Amara cried happy tears and the world celebrated 3 new lives, Susan felt phantom arms around her. Heard a voice that wasn't there. Stay with me. And she thought, I did. just not the way either of us expected. Chapter 3. The Collision. The gallery opening shimmered with possibility. Crystal glasses caught light from chandeliers Susan had installed herself, climbing ladders despite Amara's protests. Her latest collection lined the walls, Shelter and Storm, pieces that captured the raw beauty of surviving what should have destroyed you. Susan wore emerald silk that hugged curves she'd earned through motherhood. Her natural hair fell in thick curls past her shoulders. She moved through guests with practiced grace, discussing technique and inspiration, while her mind tracked 3 small hurricanes disguised as daughters. Lila stood before a painting twice her size, head tilted in serious contemplation. Mila sketched in the corner, her own miniature masterpiece growing on borrowed paper. Ella interrogated the caterer about whether the shrimp came from happy ocean homes or sad fish farms. "Your daughters are magnificent chaos," Amara observed, refilling Susan's sparkling water. "Especially Ella. That child could negotiate world peace or start wars depending on her mood. She gets that from—" Susan stopped. She'd almost said her father, but swallowed the words. 5 years hadn't dimmed the memory, but it had taught her to lock it away. "She gets that from my mother. Grandmother Eleanor didn't tolerate injustice either." The gallery's main entrance opened, bringing cold air and something else, something that made Susan's skin prickle with recognition before her brain caught up. White King walked in, surrounded by associates, all expensive suits and quiet power. But Susan only saw him. Older now, temples touched with silver that somehow made him more devastating. He moved with the same command, the same weight that suggested he owned whatever space he occupied. Their eyes met across the crowded room. The world tilted, everything else blurred. The music, the conversation, the careful facade she'd built. Only him. Only the way his expression shifted from polite interest to shocked recognition, to something primal that made her knees weak. He stopped mid-step. His companion said something Susan couldn't hear through the roaring in her ears. White's mouth moved in response, but his gaze never left hers. Susan's hand found the nearest wall for support. 5 years. She'd imagined this reunion 1,000 ways. Yelling, crying, cool indifference. Never this absolute decimation of every defense she'd constructed. "Mama!" Ella's voice cut through the paralysis. "Mama, the caterer lady says happy shrimp cost more, but taste better because they're grateful to be food. Is that science or story?" The question pulled Susan's attention down to 3 identical faces staring up at her with concern. Her daughters, her world, her everything that White knew nothing about. Susan opened her mouth, but no words came, because White was walking toward them. Not rushing, but inexorable as tide. His associates trailed behind, looking confused. Guests parted like water, and Susan watched his face as he got close enough to really see. To see 3 girls with his storm cloud eyes staring back at him. White stopped 2 feet away. His gaze moved from Susan to the triplets and back again. Something crumbled in his expression. Shock, chasing disbelief, chasing devastation. His voice came out rough, broken. "How? Not here." Susan found strength in terror. "Girls, go with Aunt Amara now." "But Mama," Lila started. "Now." Susan's tone left no room for argument. Amara appeared like the warrior she was, herding 3 confused daughters toward the office. Ella looked back with those 2 knowing eyes, and Susan saw the question forming. White watched them go, watched his daughters walk away from him without knowing who he was. When he turned back to Susan, his face had gone pale beneath his tan. "My office," Susan managed. 5 minutes. She walked away before he could respond, before her legs gave out, before the gallery full of people saw her shatter. The office was small but private. Susan closed the door and leaned against it, breathing through panic. 5 minutes wasn't enough to prepare. 5 years hadn't been enough to prepare. The knock came soft but insistent. Susan opened the door. White entered alone. They stood in charged silence that felt like drowning. "Tell me I'm wrong," White said finally. Tell me those aren't yours? Susan crossed her arms over her chest, armor against the way he looked at her like she held his heart. I can't tell you that. It would be a lie. He moved to the window overlooking the gallery. From this angle, they could see Amara with Lila, Mila, and Ella in the corner. 3 dark-haired beauties with their father's eyes. 5 years, White breathed. I have daughters who are 5 years old. You had daughters. They're mine now. Susan heard the cruelty in her words, but couldn't stop. You walked away from that hotel room without looking back, because you told me to. He whirled to face her, pain transforming to anger. You said not to ruin it with tomorrow. You said let it be perfect and nothing more. And you agreed without argument, without leaving a way to find you if... Her voice cracked. If that night had consequences you didn't predict. I tried to find you. The confession hung heavy. For months. Called that lodge every week until they threatened legal action. Drove back to that mountain searching like a madman. But you were a ghost. No last name. No contact information. Just gone. Susan's anger faltered. You tried? Of course I tried. White stepped closer, the space between them charged with history. That night changed me. You changed me. I wanted... He stopped, jaw clenching. It doesn't matter now what I wanted. You made a choice to keep them from me. Keep them? Fury reignited, hot and righteous. I searched for you. Do you know how many powerful men named White exist? Hundreds. I had a first name and a memory of Cedar Cologne. That's not exactly a roadmap. You could have what? Hired investigators. With what money? I was struggling to keep my mother's gallery alive. Then I found out I was pregnant with triplets, and suddenly I had 3 futures to provide for, instead of 1. White's shoulders sagged. He sat heavily in the chair by her desk, head in hands. Triplets. 3 daughters. Lila, Mila, and Ella. Susan said their names like prayer. They're smart and fierce and funny. They paint and ask impossible questions and make me want to be better than I am. And I've missed all of it. When he looked up, his eyes shimmered. First steps, first words, first everything. Yes, Susan wouldn't give him comfort. Couldn't afford to soften. You missed it all. What are their full names? Lila Grace, Mila Hope, and Ella Faith Jolie. Susan lifted her chin. They have my name, my mother's legacy. Because I had nothing else to give them. White stood slowly, like moving hurt. I want to meet them, properly. His voice broke. I want to know my daughters. Every protective instinct screamed at Susan to refuse. To throw him out. To guard her children from this stranger who shared their DNA but not their history. But she looked past him to where Lila now stood before her earlier painting, explaining something to Mila with serious hand gestures. Saw Ella making another caterer laugh with her relentless questions. They deserved truth, even if truth was complicated. They don't know about you, Susan said carefully. They've asked, of course, but I told them their father was someone I couldn't find, not someone who didn't want them. I would have wanted them. The certainty in his voice rang true. If I'd known, Susan, if I'd known, but you didn't. Neither of us did. So we can't rewrite history. She moved to the window, standing beside him. But maybe we can be honest about now. What does that mean? It means if you want to know them, you'll have to earn it. Not with money or power or whatever you're used to using. With time, with patience, with showing up when it's hard and staying when it's harder. I can do that. White turned to face her fully. I will do that. They're fragile. They're perfect. And if you hurt them... Susan's voice dropped to steel. I will make you regret being born. Mother's promise. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Fair terms. Below them, Ella looked up as if sensing observation. Her grey eyes, so like her father's, narrowed thoughtfully. Then she tugged Amara's sleeve and pointed. They see us, White murmured. They're smart. Too smart, Susan sighed. This is going to change everything. Can I... He hesitated. Can I go down there? Meet them. Susan studied him. 5 years ago, he'd been a stranger seeking shelter. Now he was the father of her children, asking permission to enter their world. The irony would have been funny if her heart wasn't hammering. Follow my lead, she said. And White? Yes? Don't make promises you can't keep. They've built lives without you. They're happy. If you come in and then disappear again, I won't. He met her gaze with absolute conviction. I've spent 5 years missing something I couldn't name. Now I know what it was. I'm not walking away from them, from you. Not again. The words should have comforted. Instead, they terrified, because Susan had spent 5 years telling herself she was enough, that her love could fill every gap, that her daughters didn't need anyone else. Now here stood proof that she'd been lying. They walked down together, separated by inches and years of absence. Amara saw them approaching, and her expression cycled through shock, fury, and fierce protectiveness in seconds. 3 small faces turned toward them with curiosity, and Susan thought, everything changes, starting now. Chapter 4, Falling Again. Morning light turned Susan's kitchen into gold, illuminating 3 daughters who transformed breakfast into performance art. Lila conducted the chaos with a wooden spoon, directing Mila's pancake flipping, while Ella provided running commentary on proper syrup distribution. Too much. Mila's drowning hers like a swimming pool. That's wasteful. It's not wasteful if it tastes better. Mila's quiet response came with the wisdom of someone who'd learned that silence spoke louder than volume. Susan watched from the doorway, coffee warming her hands, heart full of ordinary magic. This sticky counters and sibling negotiations and the smell of burning pancakes, this was her life. Messy and beautiful and hers. The doorbell shattered the moment. All 3 girls froze like deer sensing wolves. Susan's stomach dropped because she knew. She'd given him the address after 3 weeks of supervised gallery visits. Had watched him stumble through learning their personalities, Lila's need for order, Mila's artistic soul, Ella's relentless pursuit of justice. Now he stood on her threshold, holding bags from the bakery down the street. I brought reinforcements. White lifted the bags slightly. Fresh croissants. And those chocolate things Ella mentioned approximately 400 times last visit. Pain au chocolat, Susan corrected automatically, then caught herself. When had she started finishing his sentences? You didn't have to. I wanted to. He looked past her to where 3 heads peeked around the corner. Morning, ladies. Ready to try actual edible breakfast? Mama's pancakes aren't that bad. Lila defended loyally, while Mila quietly scraped charred edges into the trash. Ella pushed past Susan to grab White's hand. Did you remember the rule? 2 each, no more, or we get hyper and Mama threatens consequences. 2 each. Got it. White let himself be tugged inside, and Susan marveled at the transformation. The commanding CEO who'd frozen in his expensive suit at the gallery now wore jeans and a simple sweater, comfortable being led by a 5-year-old general. They'd fallen into this routine somehow. White appeared every morning before his day began, sometimes bearing gifts, books, art supplies, once a telescope that sent Ella into raptures about seeing tomorrow's stars today. Other times just himself, settling into the breakfast chaos like he'd always belonged there. Susan should have stopped it, should have set boundaries, but watching her daughters bloom under his attention felt like watching flowers remember they were meant for sunlight. Uncle Julian sent videos. White pulled out his phone while distributing pastries. He's in Paris, and apparently the Eiffel Tower reminded him of you 3. His brother had become Uncle Jules through phone calls and video chats. His mother Barbara sent gifts with notes that made Susan's eyes sting. For my granddaughters. Better late than never. Even Damien, White's business partner, had shown up once with puzzles that challenged Lila's strategic mind. They were building something. Susan just wasn't sure what. After breakfast, White helped clean, while the girls staged an elaborate theatrical production in the living room involving stuffed animals and grievances against bedtime. You're good at this, Susan said, washing dishes while he dried. The domesticity felt surreal, being a father. I'm terrified constantly. He placed a plate in the cupboard with careful precision. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they hate me? What if... They don't hate you. Susan's hands stilled in soapy water. They light up when you arrive. Lila plans your visits like military campaigns. Mila draws you constantly. And Ella asks when you're becoming permanent. White's hand covered hers in the sink, warm and solid and dangerous. What do you tell her? I tell her good things don't always stay. Susan pulled away, needing distance from the heat of his touch. I tell her to enjoy moments without demanding forevers. Is that what you believe? It's what I've learned. He studied her with those storm-cloud eyes that 3 daughters had inherited. I'm not leaving, Susan, not unless you demand it. I've missed 5 years. I won't miss another day. The promise should have thrilled her. Instead, it felt like standing on a cliff edge, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. Weeks became months. White integrated into their lives with stubborn determination. He learned bedtime rituals. Lila needed her blankets arranged precisely. Mila required 3 stories minimum. Ella demanded philosophical discussions about everything from death to whether clouds had feelings. He showed up for dance recitals and doctor appointments. Held Mila when nightmares struck. Explained compound interest to Lila using candy as currency. Debated animal rights with Ella until Susan had to intervene before someone cited legal precedent. And slowly, carefully, something shifted between Susan and White. It started with accidental touches, his hand on her lower back guiding her through doorways, her fingers straightening his collar before they left for parent events. Sitting close on the couch during movie nights, their daughters piled between them, but their awareness pulsing underneath. One evening, after the girls finally surrendered to sleep, Susan found White in her kitchen, making tea with the familiarity of someone who'd mapped her space. You don't have to stay, she said, though the words lacked conviction. I know, he handed her a mug, their fingers brushing, but I'm not ready to leave yet. They settled on opposite ends of the couch, tea warming hands, silence comfortable rather than tense. I keep waiting, Susan admitted quietly, for you to get bored. To remember you have empires to run, and this domestic chaos isn't glamorous. Glamorous? White laughed, low and genuine. Susan, I've spent years surrounded by glamour. It's empty. He gestured to the toy-strewn room, the crayon drawings covering the fridge, the beautiful mess of life lived fully. This is real. Real is exhausting. Real is worth it. He set down his mug and shifted closer. Every tantrum, every tear, every moment of joy so pure it hurts. I'll take exhausting reality over comfortable emptiness. Susan's throat tightened. You say that now, but when the newness fades, it won't fade. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. This isn't novelty, Susan. This is me finding what I've been searching for without knowing it had a name. And what name is that? Home. The word hung between them, heavy with implication. Susan pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. Don't say things you can't guarantee. I can guarantee this. White stood too, crowding her space until she backed against the kitchen counter. I'm falling for you, again, still. Maybe I never stopped. That night at the hotel, you said we were strangers, but I've never felt less strange with anyone. We barely know each other. I know you put too much cream in coffee. I know you paint when you're upset. I know you cry at commercials about families, but pretend it's allergies. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. I know the sound you make when you're overwhelmed. I know how you look at our daughters, like they hung the moon. And I know... His voice dropped, rough with want. I know I've thought about that night every day for 5 years. White, tell me you haven't. Tell me you don't remember how we fit together. Tell me this. He gestured between them. Isn't terrifying and inevitable at the same time. Susan couldn't, because she had remembered, had traced the ghost of his touch on lonely nights, had wondered if their chemistry was memory or madness. The girls are asleep. This isn't about them. This is about us. He leaned closer, his breath warm on her lips. About what we could be if you stopped protecting yourself from possibility. Susan's resistance crumbled. She kissed him first, rising on toes to close the distance, and it felt like remembering and discovering simultaneously. He tasted like tea and familiarity and something dangerous that made her nerves sing. His hands slid into her hair, cradling her head like she was precious. Susan gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, need igniting in her veins. They kissed with years of want, condensed into desperate connection. White lifted her onto the counter, stepping between her legs, and Susan's breath caught. This wasn't gentle exploration. This was hunger recognized and unleashed. "Bedroom," she managed against his mouth. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, Susan wrapped her legs around his waist. He carried her down the hallway, kissing her neck, her shoulder, anywhere he could reach while navigating the minefield of scattered toys. Her bedroom door closed with a soft click. They undressed each other slowly, despite urgency thrumming between them, savoring revelation. The way bodies changed and stayed the same. "Still beautiful," White breathed, his hands mapping new curves. "More beautiful." Susan pulled him to bed, needing proof this wasn't fantasy. He moved over her with reverence that made tears prick her eyes. When they came together, it felt like completion. Like 5 years had been one long breath held, finally released. They moved together with desperation softening to tenderness, urgency giving way to exploration. White whispered her name like prayer. Susan held him like shelter. And when they shattered together, it felt like the beginning of something terrifying. Afterwards, tangled in sheets that smelled like them, White traced patterns on her hip. "Stay with me." Susan laughed, exhausted and sated. "We're in my bed. You know what I mean. Don't pull away. Don't let fear win." She wanted to promise, wanted to believe this fragile thing they were building could withstand real life. But morning would come with all its demands. Her daughters would wake. His responsibilities would call. And this perfect bubble would pop like all bubbles eventually did. "Ask me tomorrow," she whispered, "when reality returns." But White pulled her closer, their heartbeats synchronizing. "Tomorrow, then. And every day after." Susan closed her eyes, letting herself believe. Just for tonight, just until dawn proved whether some loves could survive more than mountain storms and hotel rooms, whether they could survive forever. Chapter 5. Foundations built on sand spring arrived with aggressive optimism, painting the world in colors that hurt Susan's eyes with their brightness. She stood in her gallery office, staring at the velvet box White had left on her desk like a grenade with a ribbon. Inside, a ring, not ostentatious, just a simple band with 3 intertwined stones. Emerald, sapphire, ruby, green for Lila's fierce spirit, blue for Mila's depth, red for Ella's passionate heart. The note read, "Marry me," not because it's expected, not because of the girls, because I can't imagine waking up anywhere except beside you. Because us is the only future I want. Susan's hands trembled. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building in morning kisses and midnight conversations, in the way White looked at her like she was air and he'd been suffocating, but knowing didn't make it less terrifying. He proposed, didn't he? Amara appeared in the doorway, reading Susan's face like always. "And you're spiraling." "I'm not spiraling. Your hands are shaking and you're breathing like someone being chased." "That's spiraling." Amara crossed her arms. "Do you love him?" "That's not. It's more complicated. It's a yes or no question." Susan sank into her chair. "Yes, I love him. I love watching him with our daughters. I love how he makes coffee exactly right now. I love that he carries bandages because Ella scrapes her knees, climbing everything. I love," her voice broke, "I love him so much it terrifies me. Then what's the problem?" "The problem is love isn't enough. My parents loved each other. Then Daddy left anyway. Love doesn't guarantee staying. White isn't your father." Amara's voice gentled. "And you're not your mother, trapped and helpless. You're strong, Susan, strong enough to take this risk." But risk felt like standing on that cliff edge again, except this time 3 daughters stood behind her. If she fell, they fell too. That evening, White arrived for dinner like he had every night for months. But something in Susan's expression made him pause. made their daughters look between them with the uncanny awareness children possessed. "Girls, homework time," Susan announced. "Bedroom now." "But Mama," Lila started. "Negotiation time is over. Move." They scattered like startled birds, sensing adult conversation that meant closed doors and lowered voices. White stood in her living room, looking both powerful and vulnerable. "You found it." "Subtle." Susan pulled the box from her pocket. 3 stones, really hammering home the symbolism. "I wanted you to know this isn't just about us. This is about the family we've built." He stepped closer. "About making it official." Official. Susan tasted the word like something bitter. "Because unofficial hasn't been working. Because our daughters ask why I leave every night. Because I want them to have stability. Because—" He took her hands. "Because I want to marry you, Susan. I want to wake up tangled in your sheets legally." Despite terror, Susan laughed. "Is that your romantic pitch?" "My romantic pitch is this. I've spent months learning what love looks like outside mountain storms and hotel rooms. Love looks like burnt pancakes and tantrums about socks. Love looks like you painting at midnight because inspiration hit. Love looks like watching our daughters sleep and knowing we made something beautiful. And when beautiful gets hard, then it gets hard." His thumbs traced her knuckles. "I'm not promising perfection. I'm promising that when things fall apart, because they will, I'll still be here, helping you pick up pieces, being picked up when I shatter." Susan wanted to believe him, wanted to take the ring and the promise and the future he offered with both hands. "What if I'm terrible at marriage?" she whispered. "What if I'm too independent, too scared, too damaged from watching my mother wait for someone who never came back?" "And then we'll figure it out together." White pulled the ring from the box. "This isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." He knelt, and Susan's breath stopped. "Susan Jolie, mother of my daughters, woman who rewrote my understanding of home, will you marry me? Will you let me spend every day earning the privilege of your trust? Will you take this terrifying leap with me?" She should have asked for time, should have made lists of pros and cons, should have done anything except say, "Yes, yes, but if you hurt them, I will haunt you eternally." Fair terms. He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like everything between them, simultaneously impossible and inevitable. The wedding happened quickly. Small ceremony in her gallery, surrounded by art and family who'd become real. Leela, Mila, and Ella wore matching dresses and flower crowns, solemn as tiny judges. Julian stood as White's best man, while Amara stood as Susan's maid of honor. Still looking skeptical despite her tears, Barbara dabbed her eyes throughout, whispering to anyone who'd listen, "My grandbabies, my beautiful grandbabies." When White lifted Susan's veil, his hands shook. "Last chance to run." "You first," Susan challenged. "Not a chance in hell." They kissed to applause and flower petals thrown by 3 daughters who understood this meant permanence. Meant their father wasn't leaving anymore. Meant family had a shape they could draw in pictures and present it. School. The reception blurred into dancing, and Cake and Ella's speech about how marriage is a contract requiring mutual respect and fair distribution of bathroom time. Lila organized everything with military precision, while Mila painted the moment in watercolors that captured joy better than photographs. By the time guests departed and grandparents took the girls for their first sleepover away from Mama, Susan and White were alone in his penthouse, no longer his, but theirs. "Nervous?" White asked, pouring champagne. "Terrified," Susan admitted. "I just legally bound myself to someone I've known for," she calculated, "cumulatively. Maybe a year total. Best decision you ever made." He handed her a glass. "Second best being that night in the mountains." They drank in comfortable silence until comfort shifted to awareness. To the way Susan's dress hugged curves, he knew intimately now. To how White had removed his tie and rolled his sleeves, revealing forearms she found unreasonably attractive. "Come here," White said, setting down his glass. Susan went moth to flame, knowing she'd burn and not caring. He kissed her slowly. like they had endless time to discover each other. Like this wasn't their fourth or fifth or 100th kiss, but their first all over again. Susan's hands slid into his hair, pulling him closer, needing more. White lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to their bedroom. Actually, theirs now, officially, legally. The symbolism made Susan dizzy. Or maybe that was his mouth on her neck, his hands unzipping her dress with aching slowness. "I want to memorize this moment," he breathed against her skin. "The moment you became mine completely. I've been yours since the storm." Susan pulled his shirt over his head, nails raking down his chest. "You just didn't know it yet." Clothes scattered. Skin met skin. They came together with the familiarity of long-time lovers and the excitement of newlyweds. White worshipped every inch of her body like it was territory he was claiming for the first time. Susan surrendered completely, walls demolished, guards abandoned. "I love you," he said, moving inside her with perfect rhythm. "I love you so much it feels like drowning and breathing at the same time." "Then drown with me," Susan gasped, nails digging into his shoulders. "Don't you dare come up for air." They fell together, shattered together, rebuilt together in the aftermath. Hours blurred into exploration and confession. White told her about the emptiness before her. Susan admitted the loneliness that had defined her until 3 heartbeats changed everything. In the darkness before dawn, tangled in sheets that smelled like them, White traced her spine with lazy fingers. "I'll never leave you. I need you to know that. Whatever comes, I'm staying." Susan wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this beautiful thing they'd built could withstand storms worse than the one that brought them together. "Promise me something," she whispered. "Anything. If you ever want to leave, if this gets too hard or too real or too much, tell me. Don't just disappear. Don't make me wonder." White rolled her to face him, his expression fierce in the dim light. "I'm not your father. I'm not whoever else taught you that love means abandonment. I'm the stubborn fool who waited 5 years to find you again. You think I'm giving up now that I have everything? People change. Feelings fade. Not mine." He kissed her forehead, her nose, her mouth with tender conviction. "Mine just keep growing. Every morning I wake up loving you more than the day before. It's terrifying and magnificent." Susan pressed her face into his chest, listening to his heartbeat, steady and sure. "I'm scared." "Me too." His arms tightened around her. "But we're scared together. That counts for something." She let herself believe. Let herself imagine years ahead, anniversaries and aging and watching their daughters grow. Let herself picture White beside her through all of it, stubborn and steady in hers. The future stretched ahead, bright and uncertain. Susan should have known brightness cast the darkest shadows, should have remembered that storms returned. Always, that perfect moments existed on borrowed time. That foundations built too quickly on too little sometimes couldn't bear the weight of forever. But in that moment, wrapped in her husband's arms, she let herself be foolishly, completely happy, just for a little while longer. Chapter 6, The Photograph. Happiness made Susan careless. She'd stopped looking for shadows because sunlight felt so good. Stopped questioning White's past because their present glowed too brightly. Their penthouse transformed into organized chaos. Lila claimed the largest room for her planning headquarters. Mila's walls became canvases, paintings covering every surface with Barbara's enthusiastic approval. Ella established a reading corner with signs that threatened extreme consequences for interruption during chapter books. White adjusted to domestic life with surprising grace. He learned to negotiate bedtime like a diplomat, to braid hair without creating abstract sculpture, to answer philosophical questions at 6 in the morning with genuine engagement rather than coffee-dependent grunts. Susan painted in the sunroom White had converted to her studio. Her new collection explored belonging, roots growing deep, branches reaching wide, the way family became foundation. She should have paid attention to foundations, should have checked for cracks before building entire structures on top of them. The photograph fell from a book Susan pulled from White's study shelf. She'd been looking for reference material on architecture for her latest piece. Instead, she found evidence that their entire relationship might be built on lies. The woman in the photo was striking, elegant in the way money taught, perfect posture, calculated smile, expensive everything. She stood beside White in formal wear, his arm around her waist, with casual possession. But it wasn't the image that stopped Susan's heart. It was the handwriting on the back. "Come back to me." That night meant nothing. "We can fix this, Nadine." And underneath in different ink, "Storm Night." Before everything changed, Storm Night. The same storm that had stranded Susan at that lodge. The same storm that had created Lila, Mila, and Ella. The same night White had told her he was hiding from a life that felt empty. Except he hadn't been hiding from emptiness. He'd been hiding from her. From Nadine. From a life that apparently required fixing. Susan's hands shook so violently she dropped the photo. It fluttered to the expensive carpet like a bomb with a delayed fuse. White found her there hours later, still sitting on the floor of his study, the photograph face up between them like accusation. "Susan?" He crossed the room quickly, concern creasing his features. "What's wrong? Are the girls—" "Tell me about Nadine." Her voice came out flat, dead, like emotion had evacuated, leaving only ice. White stopped moving. The concern transformed to something that looked like dread. "Where did you—" "Your book. About mountain architecture." Susan picked up the photo with clinical precision. "Interesting bookmark. Very romantic." He took it and she watched recognition chase horror across his face. "This is old. This was Storm Night." "The caption says Storm Night." Susan stood slowly, needing height for this conversation. "The same Storm Night where you told me you were escaping your empty life. Where you said you needed to feel real. Where we—" her voice cracked, "where we created our daughters. It's not what you think. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I was your mistress before I knew I should feel shame about it." "No." White reached for her, but Susan stepped back like he carried disease. "You were never that. Nadine, we were engaged, but it was arrangement, not love. Our families wanted the merger, the alliance, You were engaged." Susan heard herself laugh, high and brittle. "You were engaged when you shared that room with me. When you touched me like I was precious. When you said we were no one but ourselves. I ended it." Desperation colored his voice. "The morning after, I told her we were done. That night with you showed me what I'd been missing, what love could feel like outside obligation. So I was your catalyst for ending your engagement." Susan paced his study like a caged animal. "Your justification for breaking promises you'd already made? You were my salvation." He tried again to approach, and again she evaded. "Susan, please. Let me explain." "Explain what? That our entire foundation is built on you running from commitment? That the night I treasure, the night that gave me our daughters, was you escaping your fiancé?" "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Susan whirled to face him, fury igniting through the ice. "Because it feels like I was convenient. Like that storm gave you permission to cheat without calling it cheating. Like tears finally came, hot and shameful. Like nothing we built matters because it started with lies." "I never lied to you. Omission is lying. You let me believe you were free, that our night was two strangers finding magic, not one engaged man finding excuse." She wiped her face angrily. "Did you even try to find me after? Or was that lie too? Did you just go back to Nadine and pretend I never happened?" "I ended it with Nadine the next morning." White's voice rose to match hers. "Stood in her family's estate and told her I'd met someone who made me understand what I'd been settling for." She laughed, Susan, laughed and said I'd come back when reality set in. "But you didn't find me. You said you looked, but I looked for months. Private investigators, regular trips to that lodge, calling every gallery in the region until people threatened legal action." His hands fisted at his sides. "But you were ghost. No last name, no way to trace you. And eventually I had to accept that maybe you'd been right that night. Maybe perfect moments weren't meant to survive dawn. Susan absorbed this, weighing his words against her anger. When did you stop looking? The question hung heavy. White's silence answered before his words did. A year later, when Nadine showed up claiming she was willing to forgive, when my family pressured me to reconsider, he met her gaze with painful honesty, when I convinced myself I'd imagined how perfect you were. But you didn't reconsider. You didn't go back to her. Because I couldn't. Because even doubting my memory of you felt like betrayal. He moved toward her slowly, like approaching wounded animals. And then I walked into your gallery and saw you again. Saw our daughters with my eyes. Understood that perfect hadn't been imagination. It had been real, and I'd spent 5 years missing it. You should have told me. Susan's anger deflated slightly, replaced by exhaustion. When we reconnected, when you started building relationships with the girls, before you proposed, you should have told me about Nadine. Would you have let me near them if you'd known? The question struck center. Susan wanted to lie, to claim she would have been understanding and mature, but honesty demanded acknowledgement. No, she admitted. I would have seen you as someone who betrayed promises, someone who couldn't be trusted. Exactly. White reached her finally, his hands hovering near her arms, but not touching. I was terrified of losing you before I'd proven I was different. That one mistake didn't define me. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose to be in that room with me while engaged to someone else. Yes, the admission came raw. I chose you over obligation, over expectation, over the safe path my family demanded. And I'd choose you again, Susan, every single time. She wanted his words to fix this, wanted the hurt to dissolve like sugar in water. But betrayal had roots that burrowed deep. I need time. Susan pulled away from his almost touch. I need to think without you looking at me like that. Like what? Like I'm about to disappear again. Like you're terrified I'll take the girls and run. She gathered her dignity around her like armor. I'm not running. They're settled. They love you. But her voice broke. I need space to process that the man I married kept secrets this big. How much space? I don't know, days, maybe more. Susan moved toward the door. Sleep in your old apartment tonight. I'll tell the girls you have work emergencies. They don't need to know their parents are fracturing. Susan, please, don't. She held up her hand. Don't make this harder. Don't promise things we both know are complicated. Just give me space to remember how to breathe without feeling like I'm suffocating on deception. She left him standing in his study, surrounded by expensive books and evidence of the life he'd built on foundations that suddenly felt unstable. That night, Susan lay alone in their bed that smelled like him. The ring on her finger caught light from the city outside. 3 stones for 3 daughters, born from one night of beautiful lies. She cried until her throat ached, not because White had been engaged, but because he'd let her build dreams on partial truth. Let her marry him without full disclosure. Let her believe their love story was simple when it had been complicated from the start. Her phone buzzed. White's message read, I love you. I'm sorry. I'll give you time, but I'm not giving up. Susan didn't respond. Couldn't find words that weren't weapons or surrender. Instead, she pressed her hand to her chest, where her heart kept breaking in slow motion, and wondered if trust, once shattered, could ever be fully repaired, or if cracks remained forever, waiting for pressure to split them wide open. Chapter 7. The Betrayal. 3 days of space taught Susan that loneliness felt different when you'd tasted its opposite. The penthouse echoed with White's absence. Their daughters asked questions Susan deflected with false brightness that fooled no one, especially not Ella. Daddy's working, Susan repeated for the 10th time while braiding Mila's hair. Daddy's sad, Ella countered from her corner. Book forgotten. He called yesterday and his voice sounded broken. Like when I drop my favorite mug. People get stressed. It happens. Susan's hands moved automatically through the familiar pattern of Mila's braids. Doesn't mean anything's wrong. Everything's wrong. Lila announced, with her usual devastating clarity. You and Daddy aren't fighting, but you're not talking. That's worse. Fighting means people care enough to yell. Susan's hands stilled. When had her daughters become so perceptive, so capable of reading silences like other children read picture books? We're fine, she lied. Just adjusting. Marriage is adjustment. Marriage is partnership, Ella recited, clearly quoting something Susan herself had said. Partners communicate. They don't avoid. Before Susan could craft another deflection, her phone rang. Damien's name flashed across the screen, White's business partner, who'd been respectfully distant since the wedding. Hello, Susan. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's something you need to know. Damien's tone carried urgency that made Susan's stomach drop. It's about White and his company. The situation is complicated. What situation? Can we meet? This conversation shouldn't happen over the phone. The girls can come. Bring them to that cafe they like. I'll explain everything. An hour later, Susan sat across from Damien while Lila, Mila, and Ella devoured pastries with the focused intensity of small humans mainlining sugar. White's company is under attack, Damien said quietly. Hostile takeover attempt. The group leading it has connections to, he paused, choosing words carefully, to people from his past. Nadine. Susan didn't ask. She knew. Her family corporation. They've been circling for months, buying shares quietly. Now they're making their move. If they succeed, White loses everything. The company his grandfather built. Hundreds of jobs. His entire legacy. What does this have to do with me? Damien leaned forward, earnest. They're offering a merger instead of a takeover. It would save the company, save the jobs. But it requires cooperation, negotiations, meetings. Understanding hit Susan like cold water. Meetings with Nadine. He refused at first. Told them to take the company rather than work with her. But then... Damien glanced at the girls, lowering his voice further. Then he thought about your daughters, about the trust funds tied to company stocks, about the foundation he wanted to build in their names. So he's meeting with her. Susan's voice came out flat. He's trying to save his legacy without destroying his marriage. But Susan, Damien's expression turned grave. It looks bad. The optics are terrible. Photos of them at restaurants. Her family's publicists spinning it as reconciliation. And White isn't defending himself because he thinks silence protects you from the ugliness. He thinks wrong. Susan watched Ella share her croissant with Lila, the casual generosity that defined her daughter. I'm his wife. I can handle truth. What I can't handle is being protected like I'm fragile. Tell him that. Because right now he's drowning and too proud to ask for a life preserver. Susan went home with 3 daughters and a head full of complications. She wanted to call White, wanted to demand explanations and offer support. But the photograph still burned in her memory, evidence that he kept secrets even when secrets could destroy. That evening, while the girls did homework under Amara's supervision, Susan opened her laptop and searched, found exactly what Damien had warned about. Photos of White and Nadine at exclusive restaurants. Articles speculating about rekindled romance. Gossip columns asking if the CEO regretted his impulsive marriage to an unknown artist. One photo made Susan's breath stop. Nadine's hand on White's arm, his expression neutral but tired. The intimacy of 2 people who'd once been engaged, sitting close enough that strangers might mistake them for lovers. The caption, reconciliation on the horizon. Sources say King is reconsidering his recent marriage after reconnecting with childhood sweetheart Nadine. Susan slammed the laptop shut. Logic said the photos meant nothing. That business required unpleasant compromises. That White was trying to save something bigger than his comfort. But Hurt didn't listen to logic. Hurt saw his hand not pulling away from Nadine's touch. Saw him choosing silence over transparency. Saw history repeating, men who said they'd stay but made choices that looked like leaving. Her phone buzzed. White's message, can we talk? I need to explain. Susan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could invite him over. Listen to his explanation. Give him the chance to make this right. Instead, she typed, I saw the photos. I know about the takeover. And I know you chose handling this alone over trusting me with the truth again. His response came instantly. It's not what it looks like. Please let me explain in person. You've had days to explain. Days of meetings with your ex-fiancé, while I wondered if I'd made a mistake marrying you. How many more chances should I give you to be honest? Susan, please. I'm trying to protect. I don't need protection. She typed furiously, anger overwhelming caution. I need a partner who trusts me with ugly truth, who doesn't make unilateral decisions about what I can handle. You're doing exactly what you did with Nadine, hiding things you think are too messy for me to know about. That's not fair. Fair? You want to discuss fair? Fair is telling your wife when your ex-fiancé resurfaces. Fair is explaining why you're meeting her repeatedly despite knowing how it looks. Fair is... Susan stopped typing, realizing she was spiraling. She deleted the unsent message and wrote instead, Come get your things. Stay somewhere else until we both figure out what we want from this marriage. The 3 dots indicating his response appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, if that's what you need. But I'm not giving up on us. Susan didn't reply. She walked to their bedroom and methodically packed a bag with his clothes. Not everything, just enough for a week or 2. Enough to make the separation real without being permanent. When White arrived late that night, after the girls were asleep, Susan met him at the door with the bag. He looked destroyed. Stubble shadowed his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled. His eyes held desperation that once would have melted her defenses. Susan, not tonight. She thrust the bag at him. I can't do this tonight. I can't listen to explanations that might be reasonable and still feel like betrayal. I ended negotiations with Nadine's family. He said it like confession, like offering sacrifice. Told them to take the company. I won't lose you for anything. You ended them today, after I saw the photos. Susan's laugh tasted bitter. So my anger is what finally made you choose us over legacy. Not respect for our marriage, not trust in my ability to handle hard truths. Just fear that I'd leave. That's not... Go! Susan couldn't look at him. Go before I say things that can't be unsaid. White stood in the doorway, bag in hand, looking like she'd gutted him. I love you. That hasn't changed. Love isn't enough if trust is broken. She finally met his eyes. And right now I don't trust you to choose us when choosing gets hard. Then I'll prove you wrong. He stepped back into the hallway. However long it takes, whatever it requires, I'll prove you wrong. Susan closed the door before she could crumble, pressed her forehead against the wood and listened to his footsteps retreat. Behind her, a small voice asked, Mama, where's Daddy going? Susan turned to find 3 daughters in matching pajamas, identical concern on their faces. He has to stay somewhere else for a while, Susan said, trying to keep her voice steady. Grown-up things are complicated right now, but he's coming back? Mila's quiet question held the weight of every fear Susan carried. Susan wanted to promise, wanted to say, of course he was coming back, that families didn't break over misunderstandings and poor choices and the messy reality of building relationships on incomplete truth. But she'd promised herself she'd never lie to protect them from hard truths. I don't know. Baby, Susan gathered all 3 into her arms. I honestly don't know. They stood in the hallway, 4 people instead of 5, and Susan felt the absence like physical pain, felt their family fracturing along lines that might not heal, felt the storm returning, bigger and more devastating than the one that had brought them together. And this time, she wasn't sure any of them would survive it. Chapter 8. Shattered Glass. The weeks that followed felt like existing underwater, sound muffled, movement sluggish, everything filtered through pressure that made breathing deliberate. Susan painted fury onto canvas, reds that screamed, blacks that swallowed, abstract pieces that critics called devastatingly raw, without understanding they were watching a marriage bleed out in oils and acrylics. White sent flowers. She composted them. He sent letters. She burned them. He sent gifts for the girls, and those Susan kept because her daughter's pain wasn't leverage for her anger. Lila stopped planning. Mila stopped painting. Ella stopped asking questions because the answers hurt too much. "This is destroying them," Amara said bluntly, watching the girls pick at dinner like food had become optional. "Whatever happened between you two, they're collateral damage." "I know." Susan's throat tightened around words that felt like swallowing glass. "But how do I fix it? Go back to a marriage built on secrets? Pretend I didn't see him choosing everything else over honesty? Maybe talk to him. Hear his side without assumptions. I gave him chances to explain. He chose silence every time." Susan pushed food around her plate, appetite absent. "He chose protecting his precious company over protecting us." But doubt crept in during sleepless hours. Had she been too harsh? Too unwilling to understand the impossible position White faced? Was she repeating her mother's mistake, running instead of fighting for what mattered? The answer came wrapped in gossip disguised as concern. Ivy, her gallery assistant, arrived with coffee and catastrophe. "I'm sorry to show you this, but..." She placed her tablet on Susan's desk. "It's everywhere." The gossip site showed photos from the previous night. White and Nadine leaving a restaurant together, her hand tucked into his arm. His expression unreadable but not protesting. The headline, "King's Marriage on the Rocks. CEO spotted with ex-fiancé while wife stays home." Susan read the article with clinical detachment, absorbing details that felt designed to hurt. Anonymous sources claiming White regretted his impulsive marriage. Speculation about annulment. Nadine's publicist suggesting reconciliation was natural between people who understand each other. "He told you he ended negotiations," Susan said numbly. "Maybe he did." Ivy's voice held doubt. "Or maybe ending them meant something different to him than to you." Susan looked at the photos again, studied White's face for signs of discomfort, coercion, anything that suggested he was trapped rather than choosing. About nothing but exhaustion and something that looked like resignation. He lied, the words tasted final. Or at minimum, he let me believe something that wasn't true. Again, she called Damien, needing confirmation, needing someone to explain how the man she'd married could be photographed like that after promising to choose her over everything. "Susan?" Damien's voice carried warning. "Those photos don't tell the whole story." "Then tell me the whole story. Because from here, it looks like White decided his company matters more than his family." "It's complicated. The takeover bid got uglier. Nadine's family threatened." He stopped. "I can't tell you details. They're legally protected. But Susan, you need to know White is trying to protect you. All of you. By meeting his ex-fiancée repeatedly. By letting gossip sites paint our marriage as a mistake. Fury replaced numbness. That's not protection. That's prioritization. And apparently we're not the priority." "You're wrong." Damien's certainty gave her pause. "But I can't make you see it. Only White can, and he's what? Drowning. He's drowning and too stubborn to ask for help because he thinks handling everything alone makes him strong." Damien's voice gentled. "Talk to him, Susan, before misunderstanding becomes irreparable." But Susan had talked, had asked for honesty, had begged for partnership, and White had responded with silence wrapped in good intentions. That evening, Susan made a decision that felt like falling. "We're leaving," she told Amara while packing suitcases. "Taking the girls to your family home. Distance, time, space to think without seeing his face everywhere." "Susan, don't." Susan folded tiny clothes with shaking hands. "Don't tell me I'm overreacting. Don't tell me marriage requires forgiveness. I've forgiven the engagement he didn't tell me about. Forgiven the secrets. Forgiven the meetings with Nadine. How much more am I supposed to forgive before I'm just accepting disrespect?" Amara watched her sister friend dismantle their lives in the penthouse that had briefly felt like home. "The girls will be devastated. They're already devastated. At least this way we can heal somewhere without constant reminders. Susan told her daughters that evening. Sat them down in the living room that held so many memories, movie nights and pillow forts and white reading bedtime stories in voices that made them giggle until their stomachs hurt. "We're going to take a trip," Susan began, trying to make it sound like adventure rather than abandonment. "To Aunt Amara's family place, remember? The one with the big backyard and tire swing." 3 pairs of storm-cloud eyes stared at her with identical suspicion. "For how long?" Leila asked, her strategic mind already calculating implications. "I don't know yet." "A while? Is Daddy coming?" Mila's quiet voice barely registered above the room's awful silence. "No, baby. Daddy has—" Susan swallowed against the lie forming. "Daddy and I need time apart right now. You're getting divorced." Ella stated it like fact, not question, like Stephanie's parents at school. They took time apart, and then her daddy moved away forever. "We're not—" Susan stopped. Could she promise that? Could she guarantee this separation was temporary when she barely believed it herself? "We're figuring things out." Adults say that when they're giving up. Lila's voice cracked, her usual control fracturing. "You're giving up on us being a family." "Never." Susan pulled them close, despite their resistance. "I'm never giving up on you 3. You are my family, my whole heart. Nothing changes that. But Daddy loves you. This Susan could promise absolutely. He will always love you. What's happening between us doesn't change how he feels about his daughters." "Then why are we leaving?" Ella demanded. "If he loves us and you love us, why can't we all love each other in the same place?" The question had no answer that didn't hurt. They left before dawn, loading suitcases into Amara's vehicle while the city slept. Susan left a note for White. Cowardly, maybe, but she couldn't face him. Couldn't watch him beg or promise or do whatever he'd do to make her stay. The note said simply, "We're leaving to give us all space to heal. Don't try to find us right away. Let me have this time with our daughters, without complication. I'll contact you when I'm ready to talk." She left it on the kitchen counter beside her wedding ring. 3 stones that had promised forever, but delivered fracture. The drive stretched endless. Lila cried silently in the back seat. Mila drew pictures of their penthouse, each one darker than the last. Ella stared out the window, small jaw clenched against emotion. Susan drove through tears she tried hiding, through doubt that whispered she was making terrible mistakes, through pain that felt like it might kill her if she acknowledged its full weight. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. White calling, texting, leaving voicemails she couldn't bear to hear. Finally, she turned it off completely. Amara's family home appeared like sanctuary, sprawling and old and filled with cousins and aunts and uncles who asked no questions because Amara had warned them all. They absorbed 4 broken people into their chaos, offered comfort through casseroles and company, gave them space to simply exist without performance. That night, in an unfamiliar bedroom, with 3 daughters curled around her like they feared she might disappear too, Susan let herself shatter completely, silent sobs that shook her frame, grief for the family they'd almost been, rage at White for his secrets, fury at herself for not being strong enough to forgive imperfection. "Mama," Ella whispered in the darkness. "Are we ever going home?" Home. The word had no meaning anymore. "I don't know, baby." Susan kissed her daughter's forehead. "I don't know where home is anymore." Across the country, in a penthouse that echoed with absence, White sat in the dark reading Susan's note for the 100th time. His wedding ring felt heavy on his finger, a promise he'd apparently failed to keep despite his best intentions. On the table beside him lay documents his lawyer had prepared, evidence of everything he'd actually been doing, proof that every meeting with Nadine had been carefully documented, contracts that severed all ties with her family's corporation at enormous personal cost. All of it meaningless because Susan had left before he could explain. His phone showed her location turned off, her voicemails full, her absence absolute. White pressed his face into his hands and did something he hadn't done since childhood. He wept. For his daughters who didn't understand. For his wife who couldn't trust him. For the family he'd destroyed through secrecy, disguised as protection, and wondered if love was enough to rebuild what pride and fear had shattered beyond recognition. Chapter 9. The Year of Silence. Autumn arrived with the cruelty of beautiful things happening to broken people. Leaves turned gold and crimson, while Susan's world remained colorless. She existed rather than lived, waking, feeding daughters, painting without passion, sleeping through dreams where White's absence felt like amputation. The girls adapted the way children did, surface healing while wounds festered underneath. Leila reorganized everything compulsively, trying to control chaos by alphabetizing books and color-coding clothes. Mila stopped painting entirely, claiming colors didn't feel right anymore. Ella grew quiet, her usual passionate debates replaced by one-word answers and eyes that looked decades older than they should. Susan told herself they were healing. That distance was necessary. That staying would have taught her daughters to accept half-truths disguised as protection. But the lie tasted bitter. White sent packages monthly. Educational toys for Lila's curious mind. Art supplies for Mila's dormant creativity. Books about philosophy and justice for Ella's hungry intellect. Never anything for Susan, respecting boundaries, even when it probably killed him. She returned every package unopened. Pride demanded it. Self-protection required it. But watching her daughters' faces when the delivery person drove away without leaving anything felt like secondary cruelty she inflicted, because she couldn't hurt the person who'd actually hurt her. "This is pointless suffering," Amara said during one of their kitchen table therapy sessions. "He's trying. You're refusing to even acknowledge his efforts. He should have tried before I found evidence of lies." Susan stared into coffee gone cold. He should have trusted me with ugly truth, instead of thinking I needed protection from reality. And you should talk to him, instead of nursing grievances like their beloved pets. Amara's patience clearly wore thin. "Susan, I love you, but you're being as stubborn as he is proud. Neither of you will bend, so you're both breaking. I can't bend. If I bend, I teach my daughters that men can hide things, and women should just forgive because love means accepting whatever we're given. Or you teach them that people make mistakes, that marriages require work, that sometimes the bravest thing isn't leaving, it's staying and fighting for what matters." Susan had no response except tears she'd cried so often. They felt routine. The girls asked about their father constantly in the beginning. Where was he? When would they see him? Why couldn't Mama fix this? Susan answered with variations of, "It's complicated," until even she heard how meaningless the phrase was. Eventually the question stopped. That hurt worse than the asking. Susan watched Lila stop setting a fourth place at dinner, watched Mila put away the drawings she'd made of their family, watched Ella's fierce defense of her father fade into bitter acceptance that he'd somehow chosen not being with them. "He didn't choose that," Susan tried explaining once. "Grown-up problems are complicated." "We know." Ella's flat tone carried accusation. "Everything's complicated when adults don't want to admit they failed." The words landed like physical blows. Meanwhile, White's messages came weekly, restrained, respectful of her demands for space, but persistent enough that she knew he hadn't given up. "The girls need you," one message read. "Whatever you feel about me, they need their father." Susan almost responded, almost arranged visits, almost remembered that her daughter's relationship with White was separate from her own pain, almost wasn't enough. She justified it by telling herself he could have fought harder, could have shown up despite her demands for space, could have proven his claims about choosing them over everything by actually choosing, but deep in honesty she barely acknowledged. Susan knew she'd made fighting for them impossible, had taken them across the country, had returned every attempt at contact, had built walls so high that scaling them would require equipment and permission she refused to provide. Winter brought holidays that highlighted absence. Barbara sent gifts with notes that made Susan cry, "For my grandbabies. I miss them terribly. Please tell them their grandmother thinks of them constantly." Julian called once, his voice careful. "Susan, I'm not taking sides. But those girls, they deserve to know their father. Whatever happened between you two adults shouldn't erase his relationship with his daughters. I'm not erasing anything, aren't you?" Julian's gentle challenge stung. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're punishing him by withholding the three people he loves most. That's not protection. That's revenge." Susan hung up, but his words haunted her. Spring arrived with aggressive renewal, flowers blooming, birds nesting, the world insisting on hope, while Susan's heart remained winter-locked. She enrolled the girls in school locally, accepting that temporary had become indefinite. Their teachers called repeatedly. Lila's anxiety manifested in perfectionism that bordered on obsessive. Mila barely spoke, even when called on. Ella picked fights with anyone who mentioned fathers or families or anything that reminded her of what they'd lost. "They need counseling," the school counselor said gently. "They're displaying trauma responses. Whatever's happening at home, they need professional support." Susan arranged therapy for all three, sat through sessions where daughters admitted feelings they'd hidden from her. Fear that Mama would leave too. Anger that Daddy didn't love them enough to find them. Confusion about why adults claimed love was forever, when forever apparently lasted months. "Your daughters think White abandoned them," the therapist told Susan privately. "They don't understand why he's not in their lives. And honestly, neither do I. If he's trying to maintain contact and you're blocking it, that's not protecting them. I'm protecting them from learning to accept men who keep secrets. You're teaching them that one. Mistake means permanent exile. That imperfect love deserves destruction rather than repair." The therapist leaned forward, professional gentleness carrying steel underneath. "Susan, what exactly would White need to do to earn forgiveness? Have you communicated that? Or are you leaving him guessing while punishing him for not reading your mind?" The question sat heavy. Susan had never told White what she needed. Had assumed he should know, should understand instinctively, that trust rebuilt through consistent transparency, through showing up even when showing up was hard, through things she hadn't communicated because communication required contact she'd forbidden. That night, Susan finally listened to his voicemails. Months of messages she'd archived unheard. His voice chronicled devastation. Early messages held controlled pain, asking to talk, begging to see the girls, promising to prove himself worthy. Middle messages grew desperate. Had he lost them forever? What could he do? Please just let him know they were all right. Recent messages carried defeated acceptance. "I love you. I love them. If staying away is what you need to heal, I'll stay away. But Susan, please don't let them think I don't want them. Whatever you tell them about me, don't let them believe that lie." The last message had come the previous week. "I went to the lodge, the one where we met, sat in that room and remembered the night that changed everything. I'd give anything to go back. Not to change meeting you, I'd never want that, but to do everything after differently, to be the man you needed, instead of the man I was. I'm sorry, Susan, for all of it." Susan played it 3 times, hearing the brokenness in his voice, the absolute sincerity of his regret. Then she looked at her daughters sleeping in the next room, 3 beautiful girls who'd been collateral damage in their parents. Pride war. She'd left to protect them from watching her break. Instead, she'd broken them by removing half their foundation. Morning brought clarity through guilt. Susan pulled out her laptop and searched White's name for the first time since leaving. Found article after article about his company's restructuring, about massive financial losses he'd absorbed rather than compromising, about his withdrawal from public life, and buried deep in industry publications, evidence that every meeting with Nadine had been documentation, that he'd been building a legal case for harassment, that his cooperation had been strategy, not betrayal. He'd been protecting them, messily, imperfectly, but genuinely protecting them from a vindictive ex-fiancé and her family's corporate attacks. And Susan had left before letting him explain. She found photos from a charity gala. Barbara had posted, white, looking gaunt and exhausted, his smile not reaching eyes that held permanent sadness. The caption, "My son supporting causes that matter to him. So proud, even when he's going through difficult times." Comments asked about his wife, about whether the marriage had ended. Barbara responded to each, "Private family matters remain private. Please respect their journey." Susan closed the laptop before she could spiral further, called Amara. "I made a terrible mistake." Yes. No sympathy in Amara's voice, just honesty. "You did. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Susan looked at her daughter's bedroom door. Thought about 3 girls who'd lost their joy. About a man who'd made mistakes but paid for them 100 times over. About herself, stubborn and self-righteous and so terrified of being her mother that she'd become something worse. "I'm going to fix it," Susan said, "if it's not too late." "If he hasn't, he hasn't," Amara's voice gentled. "I may have been checking on him. Through Julian, who reports White has been a ghost of himself, working constantly, living in that penthouse like a mausoleum, waiting for you to come home. What if he doesn't want me back? What if I destroyed us too thoroughly? There's only one way to find out." Susan spent the afternoon crafting a message. Deleted dozens of attempts. Nothing felt adequate to bridge months of silence and hurt. Finally, she wrote simply, "I was wrong. I'm ready to listen if you're ready to talk. The girls miss you. I miss you. Can we try again?" She hit send before cowardice won. Hours passed. Dinner, bedtime stories that didn't require enthusiasm because Susan's hands shook too badly. Tucking in 3 daughters who'd learned not to ask for things they couldn't have. Her phone remained silent. Susan lay awake watching shadows cross the ceiling, wondering if she'd waited too long. If pride had cost her not just her marriage, but the man her daughters needed. The man she, despite everything, still loved with devastating completeness. At midnight, her phone finally buzzed. White's message, "I've been ready since the moment you left. Just tell me when and where. I'll be there." Susan pressed the phone to her chest, tears soaking her pillow, hope and terror warring in her chest. Tomorrow. Tomorrow, she'd tell their daughters they were going home. Tomorrow, she'd begin the terrifying work of rebuilding, what she'd helped destroy. Tomorrow, they'd find out if love and forgiveness were enough. But tonight, she let herself believe in second chances. Chapter 10. When 3 hearts bring 2 home. 3 daughters sat in conspiratorial silence, their faces wearing expressions Susan recognized as dangerous. Lila held Susan's phone with the determination of someone planning military coups. Mila drew furiously, her artwork for once not abstract pain, but concrete planning. Ella paced like a tiny lawyer building her closing argument. "This is mutiny," Susan said from the doorway, though her tone held more amusement than anger. "This is intervention." Ella stopped pacing to face her mother. "You and Daddy are being ridiculous. You love each other. We love both of you. And everyone's miserable because grown-ups are too stubborn to fix things. It's complicated. Stop saying that." Lila's shout startled them all. Calm, controlled Lila never raised her voice. "Nothing's complicated except you both being scared. You're scared he'll hurt you again. He's scared you won't forgive him. But you know what? We're scared too. Scared our family's gone forever because adults won't try." Susan's throat closed around words that wouldn't form. "Mama," Mila said quietly, holding up her drawing. "This is us, all of us, together. That's what we want. Not perfect, just together." The sketch showed 5 figures, rough and childlike but achingly clear. 2 adults with 3 small people between them, all holding hands, all connected. "I already messaged him," Susan admitted. We're going to talk." "When?" Ella demanded. "Soon. I just need to figure out Now. Lila pressed buttons on Susan's phone before she could stop her. We're calling him now because waiting just gives fear more time to win. The phone rang on speaker. Once, twice. Susan's heart hammered against her ribs. Susan! White's voice came rough, like he'd been sleeping or crying or both. Are you all right? The girls. They're staging a rebellion, Susan managed, through the emotion clogging her throat. Apparently we're both being ridiculous. A pause. Then something that might have been a laugh or a sob. They're not wrong. Daddy! Ella grabbed the phone. Mama cries every night. Every single night. Even when she thinks we're asleep. Come fix this, baby girl. White's voice cracked completely. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. Lila took the phone. You love Mama. Mama loves you. You both made mistakes. Now you both say sorry and we go home. That's literally how every problem gets solved. I wish it were that easy. Stop being scared. Mila's shout surprised everyone. Quiet Mila, who barely spoke above whispers. Both of you just stop being scared and be brave. Silence stretched through the speaker. Susan took the phone with shaking hands. White, I'm here. Can you come here? To where we are? Not for me, for them. They need to see you. They need... Susan's voice broke. We all need to see you. I'll catch the first flight. Give me the address. Susan, he paused, and she heard everything in that hesitation. I've missed you so much. It feels like dying every day. I know. Tears tracked down her face, while 3 daughters watched with hawk-like intensity. I've been dying too. Hours passed like centuries. Susan cleaned obsessively, while the girls prepared like heads of state, receiving foreign dignitaries. Lila arranged furniture for optimal conversation flow. Mila created welcome signs with flowers and hearts. Ella drafted talking points she intended to enforce with judicial authority. You'll both sit, Ella instructed. You'll take turns speaking without interruption. Then you'll apologize and hug and we'll go home. It might not be that simple. Make it that simple. Ella's expression held steel. We're tired of complicated. We want family. The doorbell rang just after noon. Susan's hands shook so badly she could barely turn the knob. And then White stood on the threshold looking like he'd aged decades in months. His hair had gone silver at the temples. Lines creased his face that hadn't existed before. But his eyes, those storm cloud eyes their daughters had inherited, held hope so desperate it hurt to witness. Behind Susan, 3 small bodies launched themselves at their father like missiles. He dropped to his knees, gathering them into his arms, his face buried in their hair, while his shoulders shook with sobs he didn't try to hide. I missed you, he choked out. Every second of every day I missed you so much. We missed you too, Daddy. Lila's usual control shattered into tears. We missed you and Mama wouldn't let us call and everything was wrong. I know, baby. I know, I'm so sorry. Susan watched them, her family fractured but not broken, damaged but not destroyed, and felt her remaining defenses crumble into dust. White looked up at her, still kneeling, still holding their daughters. His face asked questions his mouth couldn't form. Susan crossed the distance between them and dropped to her knees too. 5 people piled together on Amara's family floor, crying and clinging and beginning the messy work of rebuilding. Eventually, the girls released them enough to breathe. Ella produced her talking points. Susan speaks first, then White, then questions, then resolution. Since when do you call us by our first names? Susan asked through tears. Since you started acting like children who need refereeing. Ella's matter-of-fact tone would have been funny if it wasn't devastating. They moved to the living room. White sat across from Susan, close enough to touch, but maintaining respectful distance. 3 daughters positioned themselves between them like mediators. I'm sorry. Susan spoke first because she'd been wrong first. I ran instead of fighting. I punished you by taking away the girls. I let my fear and pride matter more than our family. I was wrong and I'm so sorry. White's jaw clenched, working around emotion. I kept secrets, not from malice, from misguided protection. I thought shielding you from ugliness made me strong. Instead, it made me alone. Everything I did. The meetings with Nadine, the silence about the company problems. I was trying to protect you. But I should have trusted you with the mess instead of trying to handle everything myself. We're both terrible at this, Susan said. Spectacularly terrible. White's small smile broke through devastation. But Susan, I need you to know something. Every meeting with Nadine was documented. Every conversation recorded. I was building harassment case against her family. The photos, the gossip, I endured it to gather evidence that would end their harassment permanently. He pulled out his phone, showed her legal documents, cease and desist orders, restraining orders, evidence that he'd sacrificed his company's value to sever all connections with Nadine's family permanently. I wasn't choosing her over you. I was choosing nuclear option, destroying bridges so thoroughly she could never cross them again, even if it cost me everything. Susan took the phone with shaking hands, reading proof of what Damien had tried to tell her. What she'd been too hurt and proud to hear. You lost millions. I lost you. That was infinitely worse. He leaned forward, desperate and raw. Money rebuilds. Companies recover. But you and our daughters, losing you was losing everything that mattered. I should have listened. Should have let you explain instead of assuming. I should have told you sooner. Trusted you with the ugliness instead of thinking I had to be strong alone. White reached across the distance, his hand hovering near hers. Is there any chance we can try again? Do this differently? Susan looked at their daughters. At Lila's hope, at Mila's quiet tears, at Ella's fierce determination that they fix this or else. Then she looked at White, imperfect and honest, and hers, if she was brave enough to claim him again. Yes. The word came simple and absolute. Yes, but we do this right. Therapy, communication, complete honesty even when it's ugly. You don't protect me from hard truths. I don't run when things get difficult. Deal. White's hand closed around hers, warm and solid and real. Anything, everything, I'll do whatever it takes. We go home. Susan squeezed his hand. All of us, together, and we figure out how to be family that survives storms instead of drowning in them. She moved then, crossing the final distance, and kissed him with months of missing and loving and forgiving condensed into desperate connection. White pulled her close, his free hand cradling her face like she was precious. Around them, 3 daughters cheered and cried and demanded group hug. They collapsed together, 5 people learning that broken things could be rebuilt stronger. That forgiveness wasn't weakness. That love survived mistakes if you were brave enough to fight for it. We're going home, Ella announced to no one in particular. Finally, and for the first time in a year, the word meant something. Weeks later, back in their penthouse, Susan stood in her studio painting while White attempted to cook breakfast without burning anything. 3 daughters argued about something meaningless and perfect in the next room. Her latest piece showed 5 figures in a storm, not running from it, standing together facing it. The canvas carried a title in elegant script. Some love stories begin in storms. The greatest ones survive them, again and again and again. White appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. That's beautiful. That's us. Susan leaned back into him. Not perfect, but real. And surviving. More than surviving. He kissed her neck softly. Thriving. Finally thriving. In the next room, Lila shouted about fair distribution of syrup. Mila's quiet laughter rang like bells. Ella's passionate defense of justice filled the space with beautiful chaos. Their family, messy and loud and absolutely worth fighting for. Susan turned in White's arms, kissing him with the confidence of someone who'd learned that love wasn't avoiding storms. It was finding someone worth weathering them with. Someone who'd stand beside you when winds howled and rain fell. Someone who chose you again and again and again. I love you, she said simply. I love you more. White countered. Impossible, Susan smiled. But you're welcome to spend forever trying to prove it. Challenge accepted. And in that moment, with breakfast burning and daughters laughing and life beautifully imperfect, Susan knew they'd won something. More valuable than easy love. One love that survived everything, the kind worth keeping.